Shana Tova. When I was but a wee lad, knee-high to a grasshopper, UFO sightings were everywhere. It felt like there was an imminent arrival of extraterrestrials, or ET. It didn't quite materialize, and actually UFO sightings have gone down precipitously since the invention and popularization of cell phones. No, it's not 5G keeping the aliens away. It turns out that having a camera on you always means that you can take a look at the picture afterwards and realize it wasn't really a UFO. And then you stop promoting the idea that you saw a UFO. But the question still remains, with our Voyager probe still going out there, will we ever encounter other aliens? Because right now it seems like the universe is empty, except for our tiny little corner of it. Let me explain just exactly how empty it is. If you were a spacefaring creature, alien, or humans perhaps someday, and you were able to get your spacecraft up to the modest speed, of 1/10 of the percent of speed of light, just that little bit, right? Ticking over. It's faster than we've gone yet, but certainly by no means beyond the stretch of imagination. We're not talking hyperspace and warp speed. We're talking just a little more oomph. It would take you approximately 5 million years to visit every planetary system in the Milky Way. That's it. 5 million years. I know that sounds like a long time, but that is a blink of an eye as far as the universe has going. The universe has been around for 13 billion years at least that we are able to measure, which means start to finish. This could have begun sequentially through 2,000 times. This could have already happened. And if it was going concurrently, well, we should be awash in aliens. There should be little green men popping by to say hello constantly, and it should have happened millions of years in the past and right up to this point now. And yet, the universe, with that in mind, is strangely silent. The universe seems to be inert outside of this little blue sphere. This paradox actually has a name. It's called Fermi's paradox, because Fermi's the guy who first articulated it, explaining that if life is abundant, and people are able to reach a spacefaring stage that is of modest speeds, that given the age of the universe and our galaxy, we should have found some evidence of other civilizations by this point. And since Fermi came up with this paradox, there have been a number of different arguments of why we are not awash in a federation of planets of aliens of all sorts. The first is very simple, that there must be something we can call the great filter. It's always good when you put it in capital letters, the great filter. That perhaps life is abundant indeed, but at some point in the evolutionary process, species after species fall at a hurdle. Maybe it will be a meteor that wipes them out, the way the dinosaurs were wiped out from our planet. Maybe it is simply that they will destroy themselves through war, as their technology, which provides the capability of spaceflight, is also, as we know too well, capable of launching explosives at one another. Perhaps they will develop biological or chemical weapons that will exterminate their species. Perhaps, any number of ways they can fail, whether it be through war, whether it be through random disaster, whether it be through their own mismanagement of their planet, before they were able to finally break free. Species after species of these teeming millions have all died before they could reach out to other planets and other solar systems. So yes, the universe is awash with life, but it all keeps failing, and that's why we haven't met any. But remember, it just takes one species 5 million years to cross the entire Milky Way in every direction. Are they all failing? 100% failure rate? if there's anything we know about the status of large numbers, is that you do enough iterations again and again and again, and one is going to make through. Right? One of them is going to survive, and yet they're not there. So the great filter to me is a bit of a failed explanation, because all it would have taken is one, and we would have noticed them by now. Another explanation is that, well, life may indeed be abundant, but sentience, not so much. After all, what is the evolutionary advantage of having a conscious mind? If you were to weigh the biomass of all the animals on Earth, those that are non-sentient outweigh those that are sentient, no matter how you want to define that, by an order of magnitude at least, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1. There are more ants within Florida than there are people in the world. I'm not so sure that sentience is exactly advantageous. And maybe evolution on other planets has not bothered to have this weird, aberrant mental condition that you might want to see your therapist about, to evolve again and again. And without sentience, well, it's kind of hard to imagine the ants building interstellar spacecraft. So, indeed, the universe is full of life, but sentience is exceedingly rare. But is it zero? I mean, there's at least one example here. I'm not pointing only to myself, I mean to the human race. And if we could become sentient, couldn't others? Is that really the barrier to the existence of other aliens? For my money, the best explanation, and there are many others that I'd be happy to discuss because I like geeking out about these things, but we do have a time limit. For my money, the best explanation is very simple. We're first. That in fact, all things considered, to get the right mix of the right planet around the right star with the right protection from radiation and the right other planets to absorb all the asteroids that otherwise come to us, thank you, Jupiter, that we actually are pretty lucky to be where we are, and the conditions have just not been right for all of those other species prior to this point in the universal calendar. We're first. All of those ancient sci-fi movies you've seen with the ancient aliens, that's us. We will be the breaker of the Fermi paradox for other species. Because in 1 million, 2, 3 million years, when humanity has stretched out across the Milky Way, the other aliens that are just waking up into their sentience and looking up at the sky, they'll notice us and say, man, there are aliens everywhere because of us. And they'll probably also have some complaints about how we're managing things, but they won't wonder whether the universe is full of life. We will have made it clear to them that the universe is full of life. But that means that we also have to accept the fact that here on Earth right now, 5785, help ain't coming from the stars. The aliens are not going to swoop down and solve our problems. The aliens are not there with advanced wisdom and knowledge to make all of our problems go away. It's up to us. Now, you might be a little depressed by that, or perhaps you're still thinking it's rather fanciful to imagine humanity as ever being this ancient race of wisdom spread across the stars, helping the younger races into their upper levels of existence. Because after all, humanity seems pretty far from that. But let me explain to you that we are already living proof. And now I mean we as an Am Yisrael of this idea. Because if you want to know what it looks like when you have an ancient species that comes into contact with a more novel species, well, we may be the same species, but we, the Jewish people, we are an ancient people. We are kind of weird for still being around, and we're also kind of weird, don't take this the wrong way, and having been a lot more advanced than most of the world for a very long time. Now, I'm not talking about some form of chauvinism. I'm not talking about some form of racial superiority or anything like that. I'm talking about the things that God says actually matters, our laws, Judaism itself. It's not in our DNA, it's in our Torah. Let me just give you a quick example. Well, perhaps you even know this. In the United States, if you were living in the 1800s and you were accused of cattle wrestling and they caught you, what did they do to you? What's that? They killed you, right? If you were lucky, you got a trial. If you were unlucky, you were put in to a lynch mob's hands, and they strung you up from a tree. Property theft led to capital punishment with complete regularity and complete legality. It was not only lynch mobs that would kill you for what you had stolen, the courts would kill you as well. Until when was the United States still executing people for theft? 1964. 1964. Some of you may not have been around for that, to actually witness the execution, but many of you were alive during that time period. And if not, talk to your parents or grandparents, and they will tell you, yeah, it used to be possible. It tapered off after a while. When did Judaism last execute someone for property theft? Anybody know? Never. Never. No human life is equal to any amount of property. Have $10 billion over here and someone takes it, burns it, and destroys it, you don't get to execute the robber. Why? Because a human life has infinite value, and any material object has finite value. And as any mathematician will tell you, infinity does not equal finite. Therefore, you cannot take a life because somebody has stolen something. No matter how angry you are, no matter how much you want to rig them up from the nearest tree, no, it doesn't work like that. And we've known that for 3,000 years. And it has taken the rest of the world to listen to the ancient wisdom that maybe we shouldn't be doing that. We figured that out a long time ago. Public education. When was public education finally mandated as a federal policy across the entire United States? Free public education, at least in the basic grades. We have extended it since. 1920. 1920. And we still have people who are opposed to the idea. When did Judaism put in place public education? More than 2,000 years ago. We have tried to make sure that our children understood at least the basics, and we had a standard of literacy that I would like to say was the envy of the world, but since the rest of the world didn't think that the average person needed to read and write, they didn't envy us, they thought we were stupid. Why would we bother to teach peasants to read and write? He's a farmer. What does he need to know how to read the Torah? And we said, because it's his Torah. It's not just the property of the priests. It's not just for the nobles. Divorce. How long has divorce been a part of Jewish life? Forever, since the beginning. It's right there in the Torah, in the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And do you need a reason to get divorced in Judaism? No, you do not. You do not have to go and prove your case to that judge. In the United States, when was the last state finally on board with the idea that you didn't have to prove the case that you were deserving of a divorce? 2010 was the last state to come on board to say one person in that group could say, I want out, and the other person couldn't stop them, and they didn't have to prove anything. When was it that America finally passed a law outlawing spousal abuse up to and including rape? That it was universal finally across these states that one could not abuse one's spouse? 1999. How long did Judaism say that that was wrong? 3,000 years. You getting the idea? We are the ancient advanced civilization. And we have been trying to help for 3,000 years. Trying to help by both living a certain way and trying to help by sharing that knowledge with anyone who would listen. Hasn't always worked out so well for us, though, has it? We have often been ignored when we're lucky, and we have also been attacked when we were less fortunate. Sometimes it was for completely mundane reasons, like, the Romans wanted to take over the world, and we were part of the world, therefore they wanted to take over us too. Sometimes it was for more nefarious reasons, of those who actually believed that what we wanted the world to know, the wisdom we were trying to share, was dangerous to the way they wished to rule their empires, their states. You know, that whole notion of freedom, liberty, the ability for all people to connect to God, the ultimate equality of people. Yeah, that was dangerous for many people. And so we were indeed targeted for those beliefs. But we're still here. We have made it past those great barriers. The great filters of history have gone against us. And yet we have survived to reach the other side. We have had meteors thrown at us. We have had plagues unleashed against us. We have been forced from our home again and again. But we prove that a civilization can survive even that. But we have to understand that not all of those great filters came from outside. As Jews, we are very good at remembering the history that has happened to us, but we often forget the history that we created. And yet it's the history that we created 2,000 and 3,000 years ago that actually leads us to be in a position to say, we understand to the rest of humanity. It's not easy. We've had our fascists, and we had to deal with them. We've had our false messiahs, and we had to deal with them. We've had our zealots and terrorists among our own people, and we had to deal with them. In fact, the Judaism that we now practice was forged in exactly that crucible. Yochanan ben Zakkai, my favorite rabbi of all time, he was there at the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70 to the Romans. That was a war that was begun by Jewish terrorists. I don't care what they tell you when you go up to Masada about the brave Jewish heroes. I certainly can appreciate the need for myth building, especially in the early days of Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel. But the people who hunkered down on Masada were the terrorists who had begun an unwinnable and unnecessary war that led to the bloodshed of our people, from which we are still recovering. And they were not some great pietists. They were not Hasids up there because they believed in God. They believed in their own right to rule. And they killed as many Jews as they killed Romans. They are not our heroes. And Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was trapped in Yerushalayim in its final days by those zealots before the fall of the city. And he went to the leader of the zealots because he was a relative. You know, Jewish geography, we're all related. And he goes up to the leader, the chief zealot, and says, look, people are starving because you burned the food to make us fight harder. We need to sue for peace. And the zealot said, I can't. Because if I climb down, if I go to the Romans now and say, we surrender, I'll be killed by my followers. There is a life of its own that comes in terrorism and zealotry like this. Fanatics breed more fanatics beneath them, and then realize at the top of the tree there was nowhere for them to go. Because if they look down, they see only the screaming faces of those that they have riled up into hate and anger. And so they cling to the top, hoping vainly that somehow it'll all be better eventually. Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai was smuggled out of the city by pretending to be dead. He pleaded with the Romans, and the Romans, of course, would not break off the siege without the surrender of the zealots. And so Jerusalem fell. But ben Zakkai formed a new academy that would create the Judaism that we now know in the shape that still has a temple-shaped hole, and that for 2,000 years had an Israel-shaped hole, but that would survive. And he embedded within that, together with all of the other scholars that he was able to rescue and all of the people who clung to this life raft of Judaism, a Judaism that has continued not just to survive, but to carry on that wisdom. When I say that we are the ancient civilization and that we have wisdom, it is not just because of God's revelation. We had that from the beginning, and we messed up a lot, as we continually read about within the Torah as well as the rest of Tanakh. It was because through that history we learned, and we kept referring back to the Torah We kept referring back to the Bible, reshaping our understanding so that we could get better and better at getting what God meant from it all. It is precisely our failures that made us into that amazing civilization that has so much to teach. When we look now at others that engage in terrorism or zealotry, that was us 2,000 years ago. When we look at others that engage in exploitation and barbarism towards their own people, that was us 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. We have to remember who we were and what we overcame from within and from without, if we are going to live up to that mantle of being the most ancient, continuous civilization that has not been able to rely upon an army to protect its existence. Think of that, of the power of what we have learned that has allowed us to exist like that. That is not our shame, that is our pride. Other nations have had to hide behind the walls of their states. They've had to hide behind the swords and later muskets of their armies in order to preserve who they were. We had none of that for almost 2,000 years. And yet, here we still are. No, we didn't conquer the world. We never wanted to conquer the world. But we conquered the wisdom of what it means to be human, of what it means to exist with meaning and purpose, of what it means to set aside the childish dreams of Neolithic man scraping themselves out of the dirt, but still using the same morality that seemed to work when we were hunting mammoth. But do we share it enough? Because you see, Star Trek aside and the prime directive nonsense, I think we have an obligation. I think God thinks we have an obligation. That as a continuous civilization with a legacy that is valuable to all humans, we have an obligation to share. Right now, it is very convenient and very tempting to simply want to turtle, to pull in our arms and head, hide within our shell, let the current storms pass, let the raving fanatics on college campuses have their way, let people spout whatever they want in any forum, and just, it'll pass. Stay strong, support Israel as she continues to fight at what's necessary, but on the whole, the rest of humanity is a lost cause. They're all barbarians. What chutzpah? Do you think God has kept us around this long so that we could just go hide in some corner? Do you think God gave us Torah so that it could be just our personal property, just illuminating a small corner of the shadows of the universe and not be shared with the others that we encounter? Is that the narrow vision of creation? That all God wanted was 15 million people that could connect to Him and to each other in peace? That's not the plan. Which means it's harder for us. Because trust me, this last year has been very, very off-putting, to use a British colloquialism. It has been disappointing, to say the least, to see people that we thought we were alongside of, fighting for that freedom, that equality, that peace, suddenly turn on us as though we were the source of all problems, to dust off their copies of the Protocols of Elders of Zion and say, oh, yes, I understand now. The Tsar's propaganda team did a good job with that one. They definitely got their money's worth. It's easy to say to them, to hell with you. But that's not our job. It's not our job to judge them as being irreparably damaged and unavoidably lost. God didn't say this was going to be easy. When God gave blessings to Abraham and Sarah, to Isaac, to Jacob, to all of our ancestors, He didn't say it's going to be easy. He said, you will have a special blessing and you will have a special place. And God has made good on that. Because we're still here. But that means we have to hold up our side of the covenant as well. And that's not just showing up for Rosh HaShanah. Although, God bless you all for showing up for Rosh HaShanah. I know that that gets harder and harder each year as life can sometimes push harder and harder against you. It means actually living Torah 24/7. And not just living it among friends, and not just living it among families, but living it out there among others. And telling them when they're wrong, even when that's going to make them angry. And telling them what would be right. You know what would be right? Maybe don't listen to the zealots and terrorists when they suggest you do something horrible. Maybe if you have a grievance, you actually sit down and talk to someone rather than throwing a rock or picking up a rifle or launching missiles. Because, you know, we were there before the missiles, and we had people like some of yours, and we saw what they did to us, and we're trying to help you. We're trying to warn you, do not get in bed with these folks. And if you are already, get out. The worst that can happen is, yes, they may turn against you. But if they don't, you will still inevitably succumb to the society they are trying to create, and trust me, you don't want that. Because we've seen it. We saw it among our own kings of what they were like. Most of them were not like David. Who else in the world can tell the world this? What other civilization has that history, and has that history that has been tested throughout history in every part of the world? Yes, there are some other ancient civilizations, and they are our brothers and sisters, and we should be glad that they too have preserved some of the wisdom that they have. But honestly, if you've had 100 million people in your country, that doesn't really prove that your wisdom has withstood the test of time. That just proves you have a lot of kids, and you've been able to defend your borders. That's nice, but that's not what it is to be a human being. When we look out into the stars and we imagine encountering other civilizations, what we are hoping to find is wisdom and insight. We are hoping to see another species that likes beauty, that is moved by the amazing, awe-inspiring nature of reality. We're not just looking for survival. If we find ants on another planet, it will be earth-shattering and an amazing accomplishment, and it will also be incredibly disappointing. But if we find people like us 3,000 years ago, people who have just begun to put together societies that are a little bit more complicated than just hunter-gatherers, will we not want to help them? Would we not want to share with them whatever it is that we have learned that would be of use to them? Not to make them us, not to take them over, but simply to allow another part of God's creation to thrive. Well, if we have that sense of obligation and of hope for encountering others in the world, others in the universe, then let's start here, this planet. It's not easy, and people are still going to hate us. Get used to that. We'll talk about it more tomorrow. But understand that just because they're terrible doesn't mean we have no obligation. The rest of humanity needs us. It needs you. Don't let them down. Shana Tova.